He tossed her aside like something outdated. For a younger social media star, 15 years her junior, famous for filters and empty captions. Naomi Ellison had once been his wife, a woman who gave up her own dreams, stood behind him so he could shine. 2 years after the divorce, she walked into the very same gala where he once paraded his new bride. Alone. No title, no escort. Just a deep, forest green dress, the color no one else dared to wear. But on her, it wasn't just a color, it was a declaration. And, when the velvet curtain lifted, the entire hall fell silent. The masterpiece unveiled on stage was her work, a restoration created by the wife he discarded. But the moment that froze the crowd was when a mysterious billionaire stepped forward, placed his hand gently on her shoulder, and said, "You are a living masterpiece." Have you ever been underestimated like Naomi? Stay until the end. You need to hear how this story ends. Naomi Ellison's world had shrunk to a 2-room apartment above a coffee shop in Charleston. The paint on the walls was cracked. The air always carried a trace of linseed oil and dust. Each morning she brewed her own coffee, spread an old canvas on the table, and worked on forgotten paintings, pieces no one else cared to save. She used to wake up beside silk sheets and the sound of the ocean. Now it was traffic and pigeons on the windowsill. Still, in the quiet, there was peace. Charles had walked away after 25 years, trading her steadiness for Tara, a glossy influencer who lived for cameras and compliments. Naomi didn't hate her. What haunted her was how easily she'd been replaced. The first thing she had done after signing the papers was take off her wedding ring. She placed it in a drawer and never opened it again. At night, she sometimes set the table for 2, then cleared 1 plate before she sat down, a habit she couldn't unlearn. She worked late, paint-stained fingers steady, heart quieter now. She didn't know it yet, but the woman Charles had left behind was slowly becoming someone he would never recognize. Charles's words still echoed in her mind. "You belong in a classroom, not in a boardroom." He had said it once at a dinner party, his tone light, his smile sharp. Their guests had laughed politely, and Naomi had smiled too, pretending it didn't cut. Now, every time she rinsed her brushes, she remembered that moment. The sound of crystal glasses clinking. The look in his eyes when he realized she wouldn't argue. It wasn't just betrayal that had broken her. It was humiliation. She had built her life around his ambitions, proofread his speeches, dressed for his image. And when his career bloomed, he forgot who had watered the roots. Naomi sometimes whispered the line out loud as she worked, testing its weight in the air. "You belong in a classroom." The words no longer stung the way they used to. They reminded her of everything she'd outgrown. The world Charles lived in was measured in profits and applause. Hers, now, was measured in brushstrokes and patience. The man who once saw her as decoration had no idea that the quiet woman he dismissed was learning how to build a new life, one careful layer at a time. The email arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. The sender's name was unfamiliar, the message brief and formal. A private foundation wanted to commission her for a restoration project, a 16th-century painting called The Lightkeeper's Daughter. Naomi almost deleted it. The offer seemed too generous, the tone too polished. But curiosity won. They had seen her previous work, the message said, and admired her attention to authenticity. The pay would cover her rent for 2 years. She printed the contract, read it 3 times, and signed it with shaking hands. When the painting arrived, wrapped in layers of linen and straw, she felt a tremor run through her chest. The canvas was old, bruised by time, its colors buried under soot and age. She set it under the lamp in her studio. For hours, she just looked at it, the faint outline of a woman holding a lantern against a storm. Something in that image reached into her. Whoever had sent this piece her way didn't just give her a job. They had given her a reason to breathe again. Days turned into weeks as Naomi worked on The Lightkeeper's Daughter. Each brushstroke peeled away the darkness, revealing faint traces of gold and blue beneath the grime. She worked in silence, her breath steady, her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of restoration. Sometimes, as she leaned close to the canvas, she thought of herself and the woman in the painting, both of them battered by time, still holding on to light. It was strange how healing the art had become. With every flake of dust she brushed away, she felt her own scars soften. The studio changed with her. Morning light crept through the blinds, spilling across her workspace. Plants she thought were dying began to bloom again. Even the air felt lighter. She started humming as she worked, the first music in that room in years. For once, she wasn't thinking about Charles or Tara or the life she'd lost. She was thinking about colors, how blue could carry sorrow and how gold could forgive it. By the time she set her brush down, the woman in the painting was glowing again, and so was Naomi. The envelope arrived on a rainy morning, slipped beneath her studio door. Heavy paper, embossed gold lettering. Naomi wiped her hands on a rag before picking it up. Inside was an invitation from the Charleston Heritage Fund, a charity gala celebrating the city's finest restoration works. Her eyes moved slowly over the words until they reached the final line. Attendance of Ms. Naomi Ellison is required. Required, not requested. She blinked, reading it again. They were unveiling The Lightkeeper's Daughter, her painting. Her work was going to hang under bright museum lights not hidden in a back room. For a moment her heart swelled with something she hadn't felt in years, pride mixed with fear. The thought of crowds, of polite faces and whispered judgments made her stomach tighten. Still, she traced her name on the card with her thumb. Naomi Ellison. Not Mrs. Charles Ellison, just Naomi. It felt like a beginning, and yet a faint unease stirred inside her, like a shadow at the edge of light. Someone important had chosen her. Someone who wanted her there. But she had no idea the name she'd find at the bottom of the guest list would change everything. The next morning, Naomi placed the invitation on her kitchen table. Steam rose from her teacup as she reread the gold letters, this time more carefully. Her gaze stopped on one particular line printed near the bottom: Honorary Hosts, Charles Ellison and Tara Ellison. The porcelain cup slipped in her fingers. Tea splashed across the table. Her breath caught halfway between disbelief and dread. Charles, her ex-husband, the same man who once told her art was a nice hobby. He was hosting the very gala that would showcase the piece she had poured her soul into. Naomi leaned back, staring at the ceiling as laughter from the street drifted through the window. The city seemed to mock her silence. Part of her wanted to burn the invitation, pretend it never came. But another part, the one that had survived heartbreak and humiliation, refused to hide again. Her hands trembled as she set the card aside. Maybe this was fate's cruel sense of humor, or maybe it was the universe giving her a stage she never asked for. Either way, she would have to decide whether to show up or disappear all over again. Naomi called Lydia that afternoon, her voice shaking. Her friend's laugh came sharp through the phone. "You're kidding me. He's hosting your night?" Naomi sighed. "I can't go, Lyd. I won't give them the satisfaction." There was silence. Then Lydia spoke, softer this time. "Listen to me, Naomi. You're not his past. You're his proof he lost something priceless." The words hung in the air. Naomi could almost see Lydia pacing her cluttered newsroom, hands on hips, fire in her tone. "You restored that painting with your own hands. You earned that spotlight. Don't you dare let him steal it too." Naomi smiled faintly, though her chest ached. "Maybe I just don't belong in that world anymore." Lydia didn't miss a beat. "That world never deserved you. Now go remind them who you are." The call ended, leaving the studio quiet again. Naomi looked at the invitation on her work table, its edges catching the light. She still felt fear, but underneath it, something else began to stir: resolve. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't running away. She was being called back to where she'd once been erased, and this time she'd write her own story. The closet smelled of cedar and memory. Naomi pushed aside her paint-streaked clothes until her hand found a long garment bag. Inside was the navy silk gown she had worn to Charles's last charity dinner. It shimmered faintly under the bulb, perfect and cold. She touched the fabric, then stepped back. It wasn't just a dress. It was a costume from a life that no longer fit. That woman had smiled for photographs she never wanted to be in. Naomi zipped the bag closed and placed it back in the dark. On her next day off, she wandered through a small consignment shop downtown, where Charleston's elite traded last season's pride. There, tucked between sequined gowns, she found it. A forest green velvet dress. Simple neckline, long sleeves. The kind of beauty that whispered instead of shouted. When she tried it on, it felt like skin, not armor. She added her grandmother's pearl earrings and the thin silver bracelet she'd fought to keep in the divorce. In the mirror, her reflection didn't look wealthy or young. It looked honest. For the first time in years, Naomi didn't see loss. She saw a woman preparing to reclaim her name. Charleston glimmered that evening, the air thick with perfume and jazz. Naomi's taxi wound through the old streets toward the Museum of Fine Arts. Through the window, she saw women in diamonds stepping from black cars, flashes from cameras lighting the marble steps. Her pulse quickened. She smoothed her dress, willing her hands to stop trembling. Every instinct told her to turn back, to stay in the quiet safety of her studio. But she had promised herself she wouldn't disappear again. When the driver stopped, she paid him and stepped out into the soft glow of the museum lights. The chill of the evening brushed her shoulders. For a heartbeat, she stood on the edge of the crowd, watching Charleston's powerful laugh and pose beneath chandeliers. She felt like a sparrow among peacocks. But then she remembered Lydia's words. "You earned that spotlight." Naomi drew a breath, straightened her back, and walked toward the entrance. Each step echoed against the stone. She didn't take the red carpet lined with reporters. Instead, she slipped in through the side door marked "Featured Guests." The hum of voices grew louder as the door closed behind her. She was inside. The night, her night, had begun. Naomi hadn't taken more than a few steps inside when a ripple of sound rolled through the hall. Camera flashes burst near the main entrance. She turned and froze. Charles Ellison stepped out of a sleek black Bentley, Tara on his arm. He looked taller somehow, sharper in his tailored tuxedo. The crowd greeted him with polite applause, his name whispered like a brand. Tara laughed too loudly, the diamond on her wrist catching every light. Naomi's throat tightened. Her fingers curled around the clutch she carried. For a second, she wanted to vanish into the nearest shadow. It had been 2 years, but the sight of him still stirred something she wished were gone. She watched as they posed for the photographers, his hand at Tara's back, the perfect image of triumph. For everyone else, he was winning. For her, he was a ghost she had finally stopped chasing. Naomi turned away, steadying her breath. He hadn't seen her yet, and maybe that was mercy. She didn't belong in his world anymore, but somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that tonight might be the last time his shadow could touch her. Her phone vibrated in her clutch. Naomi stepped aside near a marble pillar and opened the message. "Ms. Ellison, Mr. Blackwell's assistant is looking for you. Please meet her near the east corridor." Her pulse quickened. She looked around, unsure who Mr. Blackwell was. The name sounded distant, powerful. Whoever he was, he had arranged this event, and apparently he wanted to meet her. Naomi inhaled deeply, trying to steady her heartbeat. For a moment she thought about leaving. Then she remembered the painting. This night wasn't about Charles. It was about the lightkeeper's daughter, her work. She tucked the phone away and walked deeper into the museum. Each step echoed on the marble floor, mingling with laughter and soft music. Waiters glided by with champagne flutes, their faces practiced and blank. Naomi held her head high, the way she used to when she was still Mrs. Ellison, before the world had forgotten her name. Somewhere ahead, in that endless room filled with glass and gold, someone was waiting. She didn't know it yet, but the person behind that message was about to change how she saw herself forever. She spotted him near the staircase, surrounded by people who smiled too widely. Charles. He was laughing, one arm around Tara, glass of champagne in hand. Naomi tried to pass behind him, unseen, but his voice cut through the noise. Well, well, I didn't know they let staff mingle with guests now. Every conversation nearby seemed to pause. Her body stiffened. The words sliced through her like old glass. She turned slowly, forcing her face calm. He smiled, pleased with himself, the same smirk he used whenever he wanted control. Tara tilted her head, eyes full of false sweetness. Naomi could feel the weight of the room shifting. Curiosity, pity, judgment. The old Naomi would have flushed red, stumbled over an excuse, tried to shrink away, but not tonight. She set her clutch down on the table beside her, her movements deliberate, graceful. The music resumed in the background, soft but steady. Her voice, when it came, was even and clear. "Good evening, Charles." For a heartbeat, the arrogance in his smile faltered. It was the first time she had said his name without shaking. Tara's giggle filled the air, high and practiced. "Oh, how lovely. Are you helping with the art display, Naomi?" Naomi looked at her, not unkindly. "No, I'm here as a contributor." The words were simple, but they landed like a stone dropped in water. Tara blinked, caught off guard. Charles's expression tightened. "You're what?" he asked. His voice dipped in disbelief. Naomi didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Her silence carried more power than any argument. She lifted her glass from a passing tray, took a slow sip, and let her gaze wander past them, as though they were strangers at a train station. Tara's smile cracked just a little. Charles straightened his tie, pretending indifference, though his eyes betrayed the unease underneath. Inside, Naomi felt an unfamiliar calm. For years, he had dictated her worth. Now, standing beneath the chandeliers, she realized he could no longer touch her. She set her empty glass down, the faint click echoing between them. "I should find the coordinator," she said lightly, as if dismissing a polite conversation, and for the first time she watched him be the one left speechless. Before Charles could recover, a new voice cut through the air, smooth, confident. "I think her dress is exquisite." The words drifted like a warm current, carrying the weight of quiet authority. The crowd around them turned. Naomi's breath caught. The man approaching moved with unhurried ease, his tuxedo impeccably tailored, his silver hair catching the light. Dorian Blackwell. Even those who didn't know him recognized his presence, power that didn't need to announce itself. He stopped beside Naomi, his eyes briefly meeting hers. "Forest green," he said softly. "A bold choice. It suits you." Charles cleared his throat, forcing a smile. "I'm sorry. Do we know you?" Dorian turned to him, polite but distant. "I doubt it," he replied. "I prefer to know people who create, not those who simply consume." Naomi felt every gaze in the room shift. The balance of power had changed without anyone raising a voice. Dorian offered his arm to her, a simple gesture that felt like a declaration. "Ms. Ellison, shall we?" She hesitated for only a second before placing her hand on his sleeve. And just like that, the room, once filled with whispers of pity, fell utterly silent. Naomi barely had time to breathe before the man beside her spoke again. "Miss Ellison," he said, voice low but carrying easily through the murmurs. "I've been waiting to meet you." Her name on his tongue sounded different, important. Every head nearby turned. Charles's confident smile faltered. He blinked, recognition dawning. "Dorian Blackwell?" he stammered, disbelief thick in his voice. The name rippled through the crowd like electricity. The billionaire. The man who funded the gala. The man who owned half the art world. Dorian nodded politely but didn't take his eyes off Naomi. "The Lightkeeper's daughter is extraordinary," he said. "You gave it a second life. I wanted to thank you in person." The words landed like a thunderclap. Naomi's pulse thudded in her ears. Charles stood frozen, his hand still gripping his glass, his mind catching up to the impossible truth. The woman he once dismissed had not only been invited, she was being honored by the host himself. Whispers spread in every direction, a storm of curiosity and awe. Naomi didn't look at Charles. She didn't need to. For the first time, she wasn't the one shrinking under the lights. He was. The air between them felt charged. Dorian's gaze softened, his voice measured. "Would you allow me to escort you, Miss Ellison?" Naomi hesitated. The room had gone utterly quiet. She could feel hundreds of eyes pressing against her back. Charles's jaw tightened, his perfect posture cracking for the first time that night. Tara's fingers clung to his sleeve, her smile brittle. Naomi looked at Dorian's offered arm, steady, patient, without demand. He wasn't rescuing her. He was inviting her to stand beside him. She placed her hand lightly on his arm. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. The photographers raised their cameras again, flashes sparking like small explosions. Dorian guided her forward, not rushing, letting each step fall naturally into rhythm. Naomi held her head high, her pulse strong and even now. Every face they passed shifted. Whispers, envy, curiosity. No one saw her as an outsider anymore. She wasn't Charles's ex-wife tonight. She was Ms. Ellison, the woman at the Billionaire's side, and, for the first time in years, Naomi didn't feel out of place. She felt seen. They reached the reserved section near the stage, where soft light fell in golden pools. Dorian leaned closer, his voice gentle enough for her alone. "Talent should never apologize for existing." Naomi blinked, unsure how to respond. He wasn't flattering her, he was stating a fact. Something inside her shifted. How many years had she spent apologizing for taking up space, for speaking too loudly, dreaming too boldly, loving too much? With Charles, her brilliance had been treated as a flaw. With Dorian, it was simply truth. She met his eyes and gave a small, genuine smile. "Thank you," she whispered. He returned the smile, brief but warm. "You gave life back to something the world forgot," he said. "Don't ever shrink for that." Naomi turned her gaze toward the stage. The curtains swayed slightly in the air-conditioned hush. She could see the outline of the veiled painting waiting to be revealed. Her painting. A tremor of anticipation replaced the fear that had lived inside her for years. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing. This time, she belonged here. The lights dimmed, and the crowd grew still. A man in a crisp black suit stepped to the podium, his smile practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "welcome to the Charleston Heritage Fund Gala." Naomi barely heard the rest. Her heartbeat drummed louder than the applause. She could feel Dorian's calm beside her, a quiet anchor. "And now," the MC continued, "we come to tonight's highlight, the unveiling of a long-lost masterpiece, The Lightkeeper's Daughter." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the audience. "This extraordinary restoration was made possible by the generosity of our host, Mr. Dorian Blackwell, and the remarkable skill of one woman, Ms. Naomi Ellison." Her name echoed through the hall. A spotlight cut through the dark and landed on her. Naomi froze. Hundreds of faces turned toward her. The weight of their attention pressed down like heat. Her breath caught. She had dreamed of this once, long ago, but never like this. Dorian's hand brushed her arm, steady, grounding. She looked at him. He nodded once, reassuring. It was time. Naomi stepped onto the stage, the world narrowing to the sound of her heels against the floor. She reached the easel draped in velvet. For a moment, her hands hovered above the cloth. Her reflection flickered faintly in the frame's glass. Older, wiser, unbroken. The room held its breath. With one steady motion, she pulled the fabric away. The painting came alive under the golden lights. Gasps rippled through the hall. The Lightkeeper's Daughter glowed as if reborn. The lantern in the girl's hand burning with quiet defiance, the sea behind her endless and dark. Every color Naomi had uncovered shimmered now, alive again. She heard the audience begin to clap, softly at first, then louder, until it filled the hall like thunder. Naomi stood still, eyes on the painting. The girl she had restored looked back at her with calm strength, her light cutting through the storm. It wasn't just the painting that had been brought back to life. It was Naomi herself. And as she stood there beneath the glare of the lights, she finally understood. Sometimes resurrection doesn't come from miracles, but from the quiet, stubborn act of not giving up. The applause grew louder, rising like a tide that swallowed the silence. At first, Naomi couldn't move. Her fingers trembled, still gripping the velvet cloth she had pulled away. Then she looked up, faces everywhere, eyes bright, hands clapping, some even standing. The sound hit her like a wave. She had spent years working in silence, unseen, unacknowledged. Now, every echo in that hall carried a truth she had almost forgotten. She mattered. Tears blurred her vision. She blinked hard, refusing to let them fall. This moment wasn't about pain anymore. It was release, pure and clean. Somewhere in the front row, she caught a glimpse of Dorian, his expression calm but proud. He didn't cheer or gesture. He simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that this was hers. Naomi took a slow step back from the painting. For the first time, she didn't feel small under the light. She belonged in it, and in that golden glow she finally exhaled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The hall rose to its feet. Naomi Ellison, once forgotten, was being seen. Fully, finally, irrevocably. The applause still thundered when the cameras turned toward the audience. Lenses flashed across the first row, capturing every expression, every gasp. And there, under the spotlight's reflection, sat Charles Ellison. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't even breathing. Tara sat beside him, her posture rigid, her smile fixed and lifeless. They looked like statues carved from disbelief. Charles's hand gripped the edge of his chair. The woman he had once belittled, dismissed, and abandoned was standing on stage, applauded, honored, elevated. His mind couldn't compute it. He had spent years painting her as insignificant, and now the world was watching her prove him wrong. The camera lingered on his face, capturing the moment pride turned into humiliation. Naomi didn't see it, but everyone else did. Whispers spread like wildfire, soft, gleeful, merciless. Tara leaned toward him, her voice a hiss meant to be private. "Charles, smile." But he couldn't. He looked at Naomi, his expression hollow. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this was the price of arrogance, watching the one you broke rise higher than you ever could. The applause softened into silence as Dorian Blackwell approached the stage. He moved with quiet authority, not needing to demand attention. He simply had it. "Tonight," he began, voice steady, "we celebrate more than art. We celebrate restoration, not just of canvas and paint, but of what time tries to erase." He turned toward Naomi, his eyes gentle but unflinching. "When I acquired the lightkeeper's daughter, I wasn't seeking a restorer. I was seeking a resurrection." A ripple went through the crowd. Dorian's voice dropped lower, resonant. "She brought a lost soul back to life, not only through skill, but through grace. She saw what others overlooked, and she listened to what the silence had to say." Naomi felt her throat tighten. The words weren't grand. They were intimate, spoken like a truth he wanted everyone to remember. "I thank Ms. Ellison," he finished, "for reminding us that even what's been forgotten can shine again." Applause rose once more, softer now, filled with warmth rather than spectacle. Naomi looked down, her vision blurring. For the first time, praise didn't feel like pity. It felt like freedom. When the ceremony ended, people surged toward her. Curators, collectors, patrons, hands reached out, voices eager. The same faces that had once looked past her now leaned in with admiration. "Ms. Ellison, your touch is remarkable. Your work moved me. Would you consider a commission?" Naomi smiled, accepting their words with quiet gratitude. Each handshake felt surreal. These were the same circles that once dismissed her as the ex-wife, a shadow in someone else's story. Now, they couldn't say her name fast enough. Across the room, Charles remained seated, the crowd flowing around him like a river around stone. He was invisible now. No one wanted to stand near the man who had underestimated a woman the world had just rediscovered. Naomi lifted her chin. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her dignity did the speaking for her. The night had flipped its balance, quietly, completely. The people who had once whispered about her now whispered about him. And for Naomi Ellison, it wasn't revenge that filled her chest. It was peace. He couldn't stand it any longer. Charles rose from his seat and pushed through the crowd. His smile stretched thin. Naomi saw him coming before he spoke. The applause around them faded to background noise. "You're making a fool of yourself," he said under his breath, anger flickering behind his polished tone. "You don't belong up there." Naomi looked at him, unshaken. "I seem to be managing just fine," she replied softly. He laughed, short and bitter. "You think this makes you important? You restored a painting, Naomi. That's all." Her eyes met his, steady, unblinking. "And yet," she said, "it's the first thing I've done that can stand on its own." For a moment, neither spoke. The distance between them was small, but immeasurable. He had power once, control, money, reputation. But now, standing before her, he looked smaller than she remembered. "Enjoy your attention," he said finally, voice cracking. "It won't last." Naomi smiled faintly. "Neither did yours." She turned away, leaving him in the echo of his own words. For the first time, Charles Ellison had nothing left to say. Before Naomi could answer, a calm, steady voice cut through the air behind her. "I don't believe Miss Ellison owes you anything." Dorian Blackwell stepped forward, placing himself subtly between them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to quiet the nearest conversations. Charles's expression hardened. "This is between me and my ex-wife," he said sharply. Dorian's gaze didn't waver. "Then you're mistaken," he replied. "This is no longer about what you had. It's about what she's become." The tension cracked like glass. Naomi stood still, her heart pounding, not in fear, but in awe of the calm strength beside her. No man had ever defended her without trying to control her. Dorian wasn't claiming her. He was protecting her right to stand on her own. Charles looked around, realizing every pair of eyes in the room was now on him. For the first time in his life, he was the one being measured, and found small. Naomi exhaled slowly. The years of silence, of shrinking, of letting him speak over her, they ended in that moment. And Dorian's quiet authority made sure everyone knew it. Charles stepped closer, his anger trembling at the edge of control. "You think this spectacle means anything?" he hissed. "He's using you, Naomi." Naomi didn't flinch, but Dorian moved first. He turned toward her, his eyes steady, searching hers for permission, not possession. Then, softly, he lifted a hand and touched her cheek. "You are a masterpiece, Naomi Ellison," he said. The room fell silent. No orchestra, no applause, just the sound of one truth echoing in the air. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of claim or fire. It was reverence, public, deliberate, undeniable, a promise that what she had rebuilt could never again be dismissed. Cameras flashed. The light burst across Charles's face, freezing his shock in 1,000 photographs. His hand, halfway raised in protest, fell to his side. He had lost before he even realized the game had changed. When Dorian pulled back, he kept his hand on Naomi's shoulder, grounding her. She looked at Charles and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just release. The past had ended, and everyone in that room knew it. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Whispers swept through the crowd, sharp and electric. Phones rose discreetly, recording what no one could believe they'd just seen. Charles's face drained of color. He turned toward Tara, who stood frozen beside him, her perfect poise cracking. "Charles," she whispered, panic threading her voice. "Everyone's watching." He didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind spun, trying to piece together a world that no longer revolved around him. Then came the first camera click from the back of the hall, a small, merciless sound. It was enough. "Let's go," he muttered. He gripped Tara's arm and pushed through the crowd. People stepped aside, not out of respect, but relief. No one wanted to be near a man whose power had just shattered. As he stormed toward the exit, Tara stumbled to keep up, her face pale under the lights. By the time the doors closed behind them, the applause had returned. But it wasn't for him. It was for her. Naomi didn't turn to watch him leave. The story of Charles Ellison had ended, and this time she was the one holding the pen. Later, when the noise had softened, Dorian guided Naomi toward the museum's terrace. The night air was cool, laced with jasmine and city sounds. Below them, Charleston glittered, alive, endless, free. Naomi leaned against the railing, exhaling for what felt like the first time in years. Dorian stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back. "You restored more than a painting tonight," he said quietly. She turned to him. "Did I?" He smiled faintly. "You reminded people what dignity looks like." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city hummed below, soft and forgiving. Naomi thought of the years she'd lost to fear, the love she'd given to someone who couldn't see her. Then she thought of the woman who now stood here, whole again. She looked at Dorian, not as a savior, but as someone who had simply witnessed her rise. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. He shook his head. "You don't owe me gratitude. The light was always yours. You just stopped hiding it." Naomi smiled, and for the first time in her life, she believed him. Naomi walked into that gala as a forgotten ex-wife, and walked out as a masterpiece signed by her own name. The night wasn't about revenge, it was about recognition, about reclaiming the quiet, unshakable worth that no one else could define. Somewhere behind her, flashes of cameras still sparked, but she didn't turn. She didn't need to. The world could talk. She had already said everything that mattered, without words, without anger. As the car pulled away from the museum, Naomi looked out at the city lights shimmering like brushstrokes on glass. The woman reflected in the window wasn't broken anymore. She was becoming. Because sometimes, the greatest comeback isn't loud. It's the simple act of standing in your own light again. And in that light, Naomi Ellison finally understood. She had been the masterpiece all along. If you've ever rebuilt yourself after heartbreak, if you've ever found strength in your own silence, leave A in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. More stories of powerful second chances are coming. Her story ends here. But maybe yours is just beginning.